If you cast under this bill, if you cast in the wrong precinct but in the right polling location, would your whole ballot count? Because obviously you'd be voting for some people at the local level that are not, you should not be casting a ballot for. Would it just be county-wide offices and statewide offices? How would that be distinguished?
It would be only where it's relevant in your appropriate county or precinct.
Have you talked to Secretary Houston about this at all? Does he support this move, or do Republicans in the House support it?
Not at this time, but we plan to extend it out and certainly look for a bipartisan effort.
And as far as the House bill in the last General Assembly, there were conversations with Republican members, and I think that Republican members had agreement that our process in Ohio for county provisional ballots is very confusing, and it's an area of the law that we need to address.
And if I'm correct, the checklist comes from that work group. That was one part of the attempted combination of House Bill 260 and Senate Bill 8 that we had actually achieved consensus on.
Did that actually make it into the bill, or is that just a product of the work group?
We had provisional ballot in language in 260. I can't say that it was the exact language that we have in the checklist that came out of the work group, but it was, we did address provisional ballots in House Bill 260.
Mike, can you talk to how Franklin County would have counted these ballots?
Franklin County would have counted it. Previously, Franklin County had the issue in 2004 of right church, wrong pew. It's something that we eliminated to the extent that with our voting machines, any individual could go vote on the same machine. It was more addressing the lines. And then in terms of where we determined there was poll worker error pursuant to the Secretary of State's directive in 2010 and 2009, we would go back and remake those ballots. Obviously, the forms still need to be properly filled out, and I don't think this bill is saying that we are changing the law in the extent that people are not completing the form correctly, but just making sure that we're clarifying, now that we added this term poll worker error, that the law is now catching up to a term that all Board of Elections have been dealing with for the last couple of years and will continue to deal with at least through 2013.
Is there anything here that deals with training of poll workers? I mean, it seems like this is pound and cure versus, ounce. Is there anything that addresses eliminating some of the error?
Having been a former poll worker and presiding judge before, the training for poll workers adjusts every election cycle in keeping with whatever new directives may have come down at that point. Beyond that, there are notebooks that we all have that have very explicit instructions specifically around provisional balloting, because that's always been the most off-putting part of the election process for poll workers. So there are very specific guidelines to follow step by step to make sure that those ballots are executed correctly. So again, this is just enforcing and putting in place another guideline to make sure that the poll worker is protected by giving them the appropriate instruction, as well as the voter, to make sure that their vote is counted.
And I do think it's fair to point out there are 88 different ways that we do poll worker training. The Secretary of State's office has gone to a more uniform format. They do provide a flip guide, different procedures and process. But when it comes down to it, depending on what each county's budget are, I know in Franklin County, every election, we made our poll workers get retrained, and we've adjusted that accordingly. The more senior ones that have been around for 5-6 years, they're not going to the very beginning, but depending on the size of the election and the scope, you are bringing an influx of new individuals. This checklist would simplify it to some extent. It would be something that boards of elections already are being asked by the Secretary of State's office to have an affirmation statement and certain things checked off. But this would more narrow the clarification of where there is poll worker error. There's about 4 questions that if the poll worker continues to go down that checklist, the red flag goes up, and that will eliminate then, when you go back to the Board of Elections, when you have our 2 Democrats and 2 Republican members making that determination of any confusion or any integrity issues. I mean, at the end of the day, similar to what Representative Clyde has pointed out, this is an integrity issue. One of the biggest questions we get are, do absentee ballots count, do provisional ballots count? We do a good job in Ohio in the extent that 90% of all provisionals do count, but it's that 10% that's still rather high for our state, and that there are obviously areas like we're seeing in Hamilton County where it can be improved, particularly now that we have this term poll worker error that boards I know have struggled with.
Let me also add, in Hamilton County, one of the issues was that there was a new polling location, and it was an area that carried, two large precincts. And so there was some confusion in terms of people used to voting in one location for, the 5-10 years, and now they're going to a new location. So, that created, I think, some issue there. And again, the issue of human error. That's why we need a uniform process. It doesn't matter what polling place we're at, we have the checklist. It will be a uniform process and people will understand. And the issue of voter confidence right now in Hamilton County and in my district is in question. People are questioning now, what do we do with these provisional ballots? I thought they were being counted. So I think this restores the confidence, as my colleagues stated earlier.
And unfortunately, we are moving more toward a consolidated effort in terms of how we manage elections versus, your neighbor's garage and every elementary school, etc. And as we continue to move in that direction, that creates more and more opportunity for right church, wrong pew to actually happen. So we want to make sure that as we change how we manage our elections process, that we're also protecting every vote in that process as well. And when you're looking at how close elections are getting these days, even 10% of provisionals not being counted, even in this past election cycle, could have determined or made the difference in many elections.
Mike, you mentioned the difference between funding from county to county as far as training and other things like that go. Is there anything that you all are doing to address balancing that, maybe getting some of these counties that don't have the funds?
Well, and Representative Heard could probably speak a little bit. A lot of House Bill 260 and Senate Bill 8 were addressing some of the areas where we're spending a tremendous amount of money and not necessarily seeing the participation that kind of backs up spending that money. So when there was a discussion about shortening the early vote period, if you cut down that 15 days and the Board of Elections budget stays the same, there may be additional money there for training. Also, there is now an online training mechanism in the Secretary of State's office. So the training component is continuing to be developed, but obviously with tough budgets for counties, where then a Board of Elections is going to be spending and allocating their money may vary. I can't speak directly to what each director or deputy director would view would be the best resource allocation of resources.
The more consistency we have from county to county, the more opportunities that you create for efficiencies of scale. So until we do establish those consistencies throughout 88, or at least the majority of those, you're repeating that opportunity to reduce costs, especially for the smaller counties, because everyone's responsible for managing their own process.
So for this bill, the checklist, there's already a checklist. We're just making the checklist more precise and making it more uniform so that we can, when there is a poll worker error, it can be identified very quickly. So we don't see this as an additional burden of training because there is an existing, checklist form that has been presented.
Kyle Hogan has changed their. Is this just a local problem? Because as I understand, the board counted 50 provisionals and not 150 others. So is it really a statewide problem?
I think it is. I think, there are, you named a few counties that do count them. What we're trying to have is, one message, a uniform message. Voters from Hamilton County would say, well, wow, if I lived in Franklin County, how come, Franklin County votes are being counted and my votes aren't being counted? And I think as members of the legislature, it's our duty to make sure that there's a uniform process so all Ohioans have an equal rule, one set of rules, and so that every vote can be counted. We're talking about a local race, but I don't know how many of these were not counted, because these people also counted for statewide offices as well. So those votes that they voted for statewide offices weren't counted. No matter what the outcome is, I still, as a voter, want my vote. I want my voice, heard.
And just to add to Representative Reese's comments, I think it's not a local issue. I think I'm here today and have investigated in my county, but I think that many counties aren't counting these ballots. If you did a state-by-state survey, I think you'd find a very different process. Making it a constitutional issue, which I think is something an equal protection violation important for us to address. And it's my understanding that Cuyahoga County doesn't count these ballots. So I'd be happy to look into that and get back to you, but I do think our counties are treating these votes differently.
So who will be the primary sponsor?